What would you do if you caught your husband in bed with your own sister? Now imagine finding comfort in the arms of your son's best friend. How far would you go to ease the pain of betrayal? In this story of shattered trust and forbidden desires, we'll explore the blurred lines between victim and perpetrator. Can Sarah find redemption, or will her choices lead her further down a path of destruction? I always thought I had the perfect life. Tom and I were high school sweethearts who had grown into the picture-perfect suburban couple. We had two beautiful children, a loyal dog, and a house with a white picket fence that seemed to whisper, "Dreams really do come true." But perfection, as I was about to learn, is nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion waiting to crumble. The first signs were so subtle I almost missed them. Tom started working late more often, his phone buzzing with texts at odd hours. I'd catch whiffs of an unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirts, a scent that made my stomach clench with unease. But I pushed those feelings down, convincing myself I was being paranoid. After all, Tom had always been faithful, hadn't he? But doubt, once planted, has a way of taking root and growing until it's all you can see. I found myself watching Tom more closely, noting every inconsistency in his stories, every half-truth that fell from his lips. The man I thought I knew better than anyone began to feel like a stranger in our own home. One night, as Tom kissed me goodbye and said he had another late meeting, something in me snapped. I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed him. The anticipation was almost worse than what I knew I'd find. My heart raced as I trailed his car through the city, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a logical explanation, but deep down, I knew. I think I had known for a while. I parked across the street from a dimly lit restaurant, the kind of place that promises intimacy and discretion, and there, stepping out of his car, was Tom. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him straighten his tie, a gesture I had seen 1,000 times before, but this time, it wasn't for me. Then I saw her, my sister, Lisa, emerging from a taxi, her face lit up with anticipation. She looked beautiful, radiant even, in a way I had never seen her before. And suddenly, all the pieces fell into place. The late-night phone calls, the weekends she couldn't hang out, the way she avoided my eyes when we talked about Tom. I watched, frozen in my seat as they greeted each other. There was an easy familiarity in the way Tom's hand rested on the small of Lisa's back, guiding her towards the restaurant entrance. And then, just before they disappeared inside, their lips met in a passionate kiss that shattered my world. In that moment, I felt my heart break. It wasn't just a metaphor. I felt a physical pain in my chest, so intense it stole my breath and left me dizzy. The betrayal cut deep, not just from Tom, but from Lisa, my own sister. The person I had shared secrets and dreams with since childhood had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm into that restaurant and confront them, to demand answers and force them to face what they had done. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, as the perfect lie of my marriage crumbled around me. As I finally drove home in a daze, my mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How could they do this to me, to our family? What about the children? The future we had planned together seemed to evaporate, leaving nothing but a bitter taste in my mouth. I pulled into our driveway, staring at the house that had once felt like a sanctuary. Now it felt like a stage set, a prop in the elaborate performance of our perfect life. How many lies had been told within those walls? How many times had Tom held me, kissed me, made love to me, all while carrying on with my sister. The weight of it all crashed down on me as I stepped inside. The kids were at a sleepover, and the house was eerily quiet. I wandered from room to room, seeing everything with new eyes. The family photos on the walls now seemed to mock me. Tom's toothbrush next to mine in the bathroom made me feel physically ill. I found myself in our bedroom, the place where we had shared so many intimate moments. Now it felt tainted, every memory called into question. I sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers tracing the pattern on the comforter we had picked out together. How could something that had felt so real turn out to be such a lie? The days that followed felt like a waking nightmare. Every moment was tainted by the knowledge of their betrayal, a secret that burned inside me like acid. I'd catch myself staring at Tom as he slept, wondering how many nights he'd lain beside me after being with her. The man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world had become a stranger. Family dinners became an exquisite form of torture. I'd watch Lisa laugh and joke, her eyes sparkling as she regaled us with stories of her latest adventures. How could she sit there, acting as if she hadn't torn my world apart? I searched her face for any sign of guilt, any flicker of remorse, but found nothing. It was as if I was the only one carrying this burden, suffocating under the weight of their deceit. The anger grew inside me, a living thing that clawed at my insides. I imagined 1,000 ways to confront them, each scenario more dramatic than the last. But when I opened my mouth to speak, the words died on my tongue. What if I was wrong? What if there was some explanation I hadn't considered? The doubt gnawed at me, even as every instinct screamed that I knew the truth. I couldn't go on like this. The pressure was building, threatening to explode at any moment. I knew I had to confront them, but the thought filled me with a terror I couldn't explain. What would happen to our family? To our children? The life we'd built seemed so fragile now, a house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest touch. One evening, I made a decision. I invited Lisa over for coffee, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Tom looked surprised when he came home to find her there, his eyes darting between us with a nervousness that confirmed my worst fears. I played my part, the oblivious wife and sister, as they chatted about work and mutual friends. But inside, I was screaming. We sat around the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless family meals. The normalcy of the scene felt like a mockery. I let them talk, their words washing over me in a meaningless stream. I focused on the steady tick of the clock on the wall, counting down the seconds until I shattered their carefully constructed lie. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. The words burst from me, surprising even myself with their calm. "How long?" I asked, my eyes fixed on the space between them. "How long have you two been sleeping together?" The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as shock bloomed across their faces, followed quickly by panic. Tom stammered out denials, his words tripping over each other in their haste. Lisa burst into tears, her mascara leaving dark trails down her cheeks. But I was beyond their manipulations now. With hands that shook only slightly, I laid out the evidence on the table between us. Photos of them together, sneaked glances and lingering touches that I'd been too blind to see before. Text messages I'd recovered, full of pet names and plans for secret rendezvous. Hotel receipts that proved they'd been more than just siblings catching up over drinks. I watched their faces crumble as the reality of the situation sank in. There was no more room for denial, no way to explain away the truth that lay before us. Tom's face had gone ashen, his eyes pleading with me in a way that made my stomach turn. Lisa sobbed openly now, her whole body shaking with the force of her grief. "I'm so sorry," Tom whispered, reaching for my hand. I pulled away as if his touch burned. "It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was a mistake." Lisa nodded frantically, wiping at her face with trembling hands. "We never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice thick with tears. "It just happened." We tried to stop, but I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me as I listened to their excuses and apologies. The truth was out now, the secret that had been eating me alive finally exposed to the light. But as I sat there, watching the two people I trusted most in the world beg for forgiveness, I realized that this was just the beginning. What would I do now? Could I ever forgive them? Should I? The future stretched out before me, vast and uncertain. The life I'd known was gone, shattered beyond repair. But as I looked at Tom and Lisa, their faces etched with guilt and fear, I felt something unexpected stir within me. A small, fierce spark of determination. The world didn't stop spinning when my life imploded. The sun still rose, painting the sky with mocking shades of pink and gold. But for me, everything had changed. The days following the confrontation were a blur of raw emotions and shattered illusions. Tom packed his bags and left without much of a fight. His shoulders slumped under the weight of his guilt. Lisa, well, she might as well have ceased to exist in our family's eyes. I threw myself into caring for our children with a frantic energy I didn't know I possessed. Every moment not spent working or tending to their needs, I filled with endless tasks. Anything to keep the crushing silence at bay. I scrubbed the house from top to bottom, erasing any lingering traces of Tom's presence. But no amount of bleach could cleanse the stain on my heart. Friends and family rallied around me, their faces etched with concern and righteous anger on my behalf. They brought casseroles and platitudes, assuring me that I deserved better, that karma would have its day. I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the wronged but resilient wife. But inside I was screaming. Their words, well-intentioned as they were, felt hollow. How could they possibly understand the depth of this betrayal? The way it had shaken the very foundation of my world? At my sister's insistence, I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Amelia Chen, with her calm demeanor and penetrating gaze, became both my lifeline and my mirror. She helped me navigate the treacherous waters of grief and anger, reminding me gently but firmly that none of this was my fault. Infidelity is a choice, she'd say, her voice steady. Their actions reflect on them, not on you. Intellectually, I understood, but the pain, God, the pain lingered like a phantom limb. Nights were the hardest. Alone in my bed, I'd stare at the ceiling, my mind a torrent of memories and questions. Every moment of our marriage played on an endless loop. The way Tom's eyes used to light up when I entered a room. The sound of Lisa's laughter at our family gatherings. How many of those moments had been lies? How long had they been sneaking around behind my back, making a mockery of everything I held dear? Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by dark circles under my eyes and a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of coffee could cure. The children, bless their innocent hearts, knew something was terribly wrong. They'd tiptoe around me, exchanging worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. How do you explain to your kids that their father and aunt had torn our family apart? That the two people they loved and trusted had betrayed us all? I couldn't bring myself to shatter their world the way mine had been shattered. So I lied, plastering on a brave face and assuring them that everything would be okay. The guilt of that deception ate at me, compounding my misery. As the weeks dragged on, my appetite vanished. Food turned to ash in my mouth, and I watched with detached fascination as the numbers on the scale dropped. Friends commented on my revenge body, not realizing it was simply the physical manifestation of my grief. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The betrayal consumed my every waking moment, a constant companion I never asked for and couldn't shake. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. The crushing pain in my chest gave way to a simmering anger that surprised me with its intensity. I found myself clenching my fists at odd moments, imagining elaborate scenarios where I exposed Tom and Lisa's treachery to the world. The desire for revenge burned hot in my veins, a dangerous flame that both frightened and exhilarated me. As weeks turned into months, I realized I was tired. Tired of being the victim, tired of letting their actions dictate my life. It was time to take control of my narrative. I started small, making decisions without considering what Tom would have wanted. I cut my hair short, something he had always discouraged. I took the kids on a weekend trip to the beach, reveling in their laughter and the feel of sand between my toes. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The family dynamics had shifted in ways I never could have imagined. Tom's parents, once my staunchest allies, now kept their distance. Were they ashamed of their son's actions? Or did they blame me somehow? My own parents rallied around me, but I could see the strain in their eyes. The betrayal had rippled outward, touching everyone in its wake. Family gatherings became a minefield of awkward silences and careful omissions. Lisa's name was never mentioned, as if speaking it might conjure her like some malevolent spirit. I never imagined I'd find solace in the arms of someone half my age, let alone my son's best friend. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, doesn't it? It was a Friday night, and the house felt emptier than usual. Ethan was at a sleepover, probably laughing and joking with his friends, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that had become my constant companion. I sat on the couch, swirling a glass of red wine, watching the liquid create tiny whirlpools that mirrored the chaos in my mind. The doorbell's chime startled me out of my melancholy reverie. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if Tom had come back, ready to grovel and beg for forgiveness. The thought sent a jolt of anxiety through my body. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Tom standing there. It was Jake, Ethan's best friend since middle school. He stood on my porch, looking slightly sheepish, his hand rubbing the back of his neck in that endearing way he'd always had. "Hey, Mrs. H," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "Sorry to bother you, but I think I left my phone charger here the other day. Is it okay if I grab it?" I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. As he passed, I caught a whiff of his cologne, something woodsy and masculine that made my breath catch in my throat. When had Jake grown up? The gangly teenager I remembered had been replaced by a man, all broad shoulders and defined jawline. He must have noticed something in my expression because his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you okay, Mrs. H? You look like you've been crying." I tried to wave off his concern, but my voice betrayed me, cracking as I spoke. "I'm fine, Jake. It's just been a rough few weeks." He hesitated, clearly torn between retrieving his charger and offering comfort. In the end, compassion won out. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked softly. And just like that, the floodgates opened. We sat on the couch, and I poured out my heart to this young man who'd practically grown up in my house. I told him about Tom's betrayal, about the gut-wrenching pain of discovering his affair with Lisa. Jake listened without judgment, his warm brown eyes filled with empathy. As I spoke, I realized how desperately I'd needed this, someone to truly hear me, to understand the depth of my pain without trying to fix it or offer platitudes. Jake didn't tell me it would all work out, or that I was better off without Tom. He simply sat there, a steady presence in the storm of my emotions. The hours slipped by unnoticed. We talked about everything and nothing. His studies, his hopes for the future, my fears of starting over at my age. At some point, I opened another bottle of wine, and we sipped as we spoke, the alcohol warming my cheeks and loosening my tongue. I found myself drawn to his youthful energy, his unmarred optimism about life and love. The way he looked at me made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. Not as a wife or a mother, but as a woman, desirable, interesting, worthy of attention. It was late when Jake finally stood to leave. I walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him go. He turned to face me, his expression serious. "You know, Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "Tom's an idiot for what he did. You deserve so much better." Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the weeks of loneliness and pain. Maybe it was the way Jake's t-shirt clung to his chest, hinting at the man he'd become. Whatever the reason, I found myself leaning in, my lips meeting his in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly blazed into something more. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer. I ran my fingers through his hair, reveling in its softness. Every touch, every caress felt electric, awakening parts of me I thought had died with Tom's betrayal. "We shouldn't," I whispered against his lips, even as my body pressed closer to his. "Do you want me to stop?" Jake asked, his voice husky with desire. I shook my head, unable to form the words. I knew it was wrong. He was my son's age, for God's sake. But in that moment, all I wanted was to feel desired, to lose myself in the heat of passion and forget, if only for a little while, the pain that had become my constant companion. We stumbled to the bedroom, a tangle of limbs and half-removed clothing. Jake's youth and enthusiasm were intoxicating, his reverent touches healing balm to my battered self-esteem. For the first time in months, I felt alive, every nerve ending singing with pleasure. The taste of betrayal was still fresh on my tongue as I slipped out of Jake's arms. What had started as a desperate attempt to feel something, anything, had quickly spiraled into a dangerous addiction. I craved his touch like a drug, each encounter leaving me simultaneously sated and hungry for more. Our rendezvous became more frequent, more reckless. We met in seedy motels with flickering neon signs, the kind of places where the desk clerk never looked you in the eye. Sometimes, when the need was too urgent, we'd end up in the back of his beat-up Corolla, fogging up the windows in abandoned parking lots. The thrill of potentially being caught only added to the intoxicating cocktail of desire and shame. I found myself inventing excuses to be away from home. Yoga classes that mysteriously ran long, book clubs that met with increasing frequency, and vague self-care activities that my friends nodded at sympathetically, assuming I was still processing Tom's betrayal. If only they knew the depths I had sunk to. With each lie, each stolen moment with Jake, the weight of my hypocrisy grew heavier. I was becoming everything I despised about Tom and Lisa. The very thought made me physically ill, yet I couldn't seem to stop. The rush of Jake's youthful passion was the only thing that made me feel alive anymore. Jake, for his part, seemed to be falling deeper. He whispered promises of a fresh start, painting pictures of us running away together. "We could leave this town behind," he'd murmur against my skin. "Start over somewhere no one knows us." I'd nod, letting myself get lost in the fantasy for a moment before reality came crashing back. I knew it could never work. The age gap alone was insurmountable, not to mention the fact that he was my son's best friend. The mere thought of Ethan finding out sent waves of nausea through me. Yet I couldn't bring myself to end it, to give up the only thing that made me feel something other than pain and anger. The guilt began to eat away at me. I started drinking more, trying to dull the sharp edges of my conflicting emotions. During the day, I played the part of the grieving wife, accepting casseroles and sympathetic hugs from well-meaning neighbors. But at night, I transformed into Jake's insatiable lover, desperate for the oblivion his touch provided. One particularly bad night, after too many glasses of wine and a fight with Jake about our impossible future, I found myself staring at Tom's number on my phone. The rage I'd been suppressing for months bubbled to the surface. Before I could think better of it, I hit call. Tom's voice was groggy when he answered. "Sarah, it's 2 a.m. Is everything okay?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Oh, everything's just peachy, Tom. I just thought you'd like to know that I've been fucking Ethan's best friend." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Tom finally spoke, his voice was thick with pain. "Sarah, what are you talking about? You heard me," I spat. "How does it feel, Tom, to know that your wife is sleeping with someone half her age? To picture her writhing beneath another man, crying out his name?" I could hear Tom's ragged breathing. "Sarah, please. You're drunk. We can talk about this." "Talk?" I interrupted. "Like you talked to me about fucking my sister?" "No, Tom. I don't want to talk. I want you to hurt like I hurt. I want you to feel this pain eating away at you every single day." I hung up, my hands shaking. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel never came. Instead, I was left with a hollowness that threatened to swallow me whole. I'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. As the first rays of dawn crept through my window, I realized with sickening clarity that I had become the very thing I swore I'd never be. In my quest for revenge, I'd lost sight of who I was. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was a stranger, broken, vengeful, and completely lost. The harsh light of morning crept through my blinds, forcing me to confront the reality of what I'd done. My head pounded, a cruel reminder of the wine-fueled confession I'd made to Tom in the dead of night. I groaned, reaching for my phone, only to see Jake's name flashing on the screen. My stomach lurched. "Hey, beautiful." His voice, usually a source of comfort, now felt like sandpaper against my raw nerves. "Still on for later?" I swallowed hard, steeling myself for what I knew I had to do. "Jake, I can't do this anymore. We're done." There was a long pause, the silence heavy with unspoken words. "What? But last night you said—" "I know what I said." I cut him off, my voice cold and detached. "It was a mistake. All of it. I'm sorry." I ended the call before he could respond, before I could hear the hurt in his voice. My fingers shook as I set the phone down, bile rising in my throat. I'd used him, just as Tom had used Lisa. The cycle of pain continued, and I was its newest link. Hours passed in a haze of self-loathing and regret. I barely registered the sound of the front door opening, Ethan's familiar footsteps in the hallway. It wasn't until he appeared in my doorway, his face a mask of confusion and anger, that reality came crashing down around me. "Mom." His voice cracked, and I knew Tom had told him everything. I sat up, my heart racing. "Ethan, Is it true?" he demanded, his eyes searching mine. "Dad told me about Aunt Lisa, but Jake? My best friend?" The disgust in his eyes broke something inside me. I had become the very monster I'd been fighting against. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, reaching out to him. He jerked away from my touch. "How could you?" I had no answer. How could I explain the depths of pain and loneliness that had driven me to seek comfort in the arms of someone half my age? How could I make him understand that in my quest for revenge, I'd lost sight of who I was? Ethan shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I don't even know who you are anymore." As he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I felt the last threads of my world unravel. For days, I locked myself away, ignoring calls from friends and family. The weight of my actions crushed me, leaving me gasping for air. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hurt in Jake's voice, the disgust in Ethan's eyes. In my darkest moment, as I stood in the bathroom, staring at the bottle of sleeping pills in my trembling hand, I considered ending it all. But the thought of leaving Ethan alone stopped me. I had to find a way to make this right, no matter how impossible it seemed. With shaking fingers, I dialed Dr. Chen's number. When she answered, I broke down, confessing everything through my sobs. She didn't judge, just listened as I poured out the toxic mix of guilt, shame, and self-loathing that had been eating me alive. Sierra, she said gently when I'd finally run out of words, what you've done doesn't define you. It's what you do next that matters. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. I told Ethan the whole truth, not sparing myself in the process. It was the hardest conversation of my life, laying bare every ugly thought and action that had led me to this point. I know I've hurt you, I said, my voice raw from crying. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm getting help. I'm trying to be better. Ethan didn't say much, but he didn't walk away either. It was a start. Days turned into weeks. I threw myself into therapy, confronting the anger and pain that had driven me to such destructive behavior. I reached out to Tom, not to reconcile, but to apologize for the way I'd handled things. We had a long, painful conversation about our marriage, about Lisa, about Jake. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. But for the first time, I felt like we were being honest with each other. Jake was harder. I knew I owed him an explanation, but the thought of facing him filled me with shame. In the end, I wrote him a letter pouring out my regrets and apologies onto the page. I didn't expect forgiveness, didn't deserve it, but I hoped that someday he might understand. As I sit here staring at the fragments of my life, I can't help but marvel at the destruction we've all wrought. There are no victors in this twisted game of hearts and lies, only casualties of our own desires. Tom, Lisa, Jake, Ethan, we've all been scarred by the choices we've made, the trust we've shattered. Every morning, I wake up and make a conscious decision to move forward. It's not easy. Some days, the weight of guilt threatens to drag me back into the abyss. But I think of Ethan, of the mother I want to be for him, and I find the strength to take another step. Dr. Chen's words echo in my mind. What you've done doesn't define you. It's what you do next that matters. I cling to those words like a lifeline. Maybe true redemption isn't about earning forgiveness from others. Perhaps it's about learning to forgive ourselves, to accept our flaws and strive to be better despite them. As I continue my therapy, I'm slowly unraveling the knots of anger and pain that led me down this path. It's a long journey, fraught with setbacks and moments of doubt, but with each passing day, I feel a little more whole, a little more like the person I want to be.